This is a missing person. This is a mother. This is someone that people want to find. They care a lot about her.
Her parents feared the worst.
God, I know you know where she is, but help us to find her.
But as police work to unravel the mystery, they discover a trail of clues that takes the case in an unexpected direction and leads to an extraordinary conclusion.
The woman behind the hotel desk wore a name tag that read Monique Watson. She smiled as she handed a guest his checkout receipt. He looked at her face, then looked again. His hand moved to his phone, a missing person bulletin. Brown hair, brown eyes, 27 years old. Michelle McMullen. The woman saw his recognition. She set down the receipt, turned, and walked through the employee door without a word. Think about that. A mother who'd abandoned her 5-year-old son, stolen $19,000, and vanished for 3 months. Someone finally found her on December 15th, 2008, and in that same instant, she ran again. But the story of how Michelle McMullen became Monique Watson begins weeks earlier, on a cold November morning with an abandoned car on Interstate 81. Michelle McMullen stood in the financial aid office at Grambling State University, holding the paper that should have confirmed her grant, but the words on it weren't the ones she'd been counting on. The grant hadn't been approved. She was 27, a full-time student who'd moved 1,200 miles from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania to Ruston, Louisiana, with her 6-year-old son, Jaden. She'd planned on not needing money for fall tuition, room and board, or books. The university told her she could return in January, but she had already moved everything. She couldn't simply turn around and move back and forth again. Jaden waited outside the office. At 5, he'd once dialed 911 himself when she collapsed from a migraine. He'd been pretty much her life ever since. Now she had to figure out how to keep that life from collapsing. Michelle took a job at the local McDonald's, full-time hours, to pay for what the grant should have covered, while carrying a full course load at Grambling. She kept Jaden with her because she was that attached to him. But now she was balancing school, work, and raising a son alone in a state where she knew almost no one. The apartment in Ruston was small, packed with belongings from Pennsylvania. After her shifts and between classes, she sat at the kitchen table with bills spread in front of her. Tuition, room and board, books, groceries, daycare. The numbers didn't add up. Jaden's voice drifted from the other room as he played. That sound, the one constant in her life, was also the weight she couldn't figure out how to carry. How does a single mother work full-time, study full-time, and raise a 6-year-old who has been pretty much her entire life? She was very frustrated. She had to sit down and figure out how she was going to pay for everything, all at once, with no safety net. She just didn't know what to do. Her parents had given her advice before she left. Bring Jaden home to family and friends in Harrisburg while she finished school. At the time, she'd resisted. But now, sitting in that apartment with the bills in front of her and exhaustion pulling at her, the advice sounded like the only way forward. Michelle realized she was stuck between 2 impossible choices. Bring Jaden back to her parents, or try to keep him with her while everything fell apart. The first felt like failure. The second felt like disaster. She began to consider it seriously. Jaden would be better off living with her parents in Harrisburg, at least temporarily. He'd have stability, family, friends. She could finish school without 3 impossibilities crushing her at once. Michelle agreed quietly that Jaden should go home. She began to form a plan to bring him there. What she didn't tell anyone was when or how. She didn't call her parents to arrange it. She didn't ask for time off work. She just started planning, alone, with a decision already made and a timeline only she knew. On Friday, September 26th, Michelle's manager at the McDonald's pulled her aside mid-shift with news about the weekend schedule. "I have to make some scheduling changes," the manager said. "You're off until Tuesday." Michelle had been scheduled to work that weekend. Now, suddenly, she had 3.5 days free. A window she hadn't counted on had just opened. The McDonald's manager in Ruston made scheduling changes that Friday, unexpectedly giving Michelle the weekend off. She walked to her car after her shift, her mind already calculating. The plan she'd been forming in private suddenly had a timeline. It was about an 18-hour drive from Louisiana to Harrisburg. If she left Saturday afternoon after the college's homecoming game, drove through the night, she could drop Jaden with her parents Sunday evening and still make it back by Tuesday morning for class. She didn't have class until Tuesday morning. The math worked barely, but it worked. 18 hours if she didn't stop. Jaden could sleep in the back seat with pillows and blankets. Saturday afternoon to Sunday evening, then turn around and drive back. It was reckless. It was exhausting just to think about, but it was possible. Keep that detail in mind. Michelle didn't call her parents to tell them she was coming.
Certainly our feelings were that Michelle did not contact us, primarily because we would have not left her leave immediately upon arriving after driving such a long time.
She didn't give them any information that she was coming up that time. She may have wanted to surprise them, to show them that she could handle that kind of drive on her own. That's what her father would say later, trying to make sense of why his daughter didn't call ahead for a 1,200-mile trip with a 6-year-old in the car. But there's another way to read that silence. Was it really about surprising them, or about not giving them the chance to say no? Michelle started packing Friday night. Pillows and blankets for Jaden to sleep in the back seat, snacks, clothes for the weekend. She moved with urgency, like someone who'd made a decision and didn't want to stop long enough to second-guess it. Jaden asked questions. Where were they going? When? Why? And she answered in the way mothers do when managing a child's excitement and their own uncertainty. They were going to see Grandpa. They were going home for a visit. It would be a long drive, but they'd be fine. She didn't tell her friends in Louisiana. She didn't tell her parents in Harrisburg. The decision was made. The car was packed, and the only person who knew the full plan was Michelle herself. Michelle had already decided. She would leave Saturday afternoon, drive through the night with Jaden, drop him in Harrisburg, and be back before anyone could stop her. She just hadn't told anyone yet. Not her parents, not her friends. And she wouldn't, until she was already on the road. This was the pattern that would define everything that came after Michelle making decisions alone, telling no one, moving before anyone could intervene. Michelle and Jaden left Louisiana around 3 to 5 o'clock that Saturday afternoon, right after the homecoming football game. She'd spent the morning at Grambling State's homecoming, maintaining the appearance of a normal weekend. As soon as the game ended, she and Jaden got in the car and headed toward the interstate. The decision that had been private all week was now in motion. 1,200 miles ahead. 18 hours if she didn't stop. Michelle merged onto the highway as daylight faded. Jaden settled into the passenger seat with the pillows and blankets she'd packed. The road stretched north, Louisiana to Mississippi to Tennessee to Kentucky to West Virginia to Pennsylvania. She would have had to have left probably around 3 or 5 o'clock that afternoon to make the timeline work. The sun set somewhere in Tennessee. Highway lights began to blur together, mile markers ticking past in the dark. Michelle drove through the night while Jaden slept beside her, curled under a blanket, his breathing soft and steady. Every time Jaden woke up, his mother was still driving. Her father would ask him about it later. Did they stop? Did they sleep? Jaden said he slept and took naps in the car. But every time he opened his eyes, Michelle's hands were still on the wheel, her face lit by the dashboard glow, the highway still unfolding in the headlights. Michelle drove here in an amount of time that would certainly say that she didn't stop very much. She stopped for gas. Maybe once, maybe twice, just long enough to fill the tank, use the restroom, get back on the road. No rest stops, no hotels, no pulling over to sleep for a few hours in a parking lot. Most people would have pulled over, found a rest stop, slept a few hours, but Michelle didn't have time for that. The math she'd calculated back in Ruston was unforgiving. Leave Saturday afternoon, arrive Sunday, turn around and drive back, make it to class Tuesday morning. There was no margin for rest, no buffer for delay. The only way the plan worked was if she kept moving. Jaden woke up in Kentucky, then again in West Virginia. Each time the same thing, his mother driving. The road still ahead, the darkness giving way slowly to dawn. By Sunday morning, Michelle was approaching Harrisburg. It's about an 18-hour drive from Louisiana, and she'd made it in almost exactly that, running on no sleep, her eyes burning, her hands tight on the steering wheel. She was pulling into familiar territory after a marathon drive most people wouldn't attempt alone, let alone with a 6-year-old in the passenger seat. And no one there knew she was coming. Around 8:30 Sunday evening, after driving straight through with almost no rest, Michelle pulls up to her childhood friend's place in Harrisburg with Jaden. She's made it. But what she does next, what she leaves behind before getting back in that car, will turn her disappearance into something no one can explain. It was about 9 o'clock Sunday evening when Michelle met with her childhood friend in Harrisburg and handed over Jaden. Not her parents' house, a friend's home, after nearly a full day in the area. The childhood friend Michelle entrusted Jaden to would later receive questions from police. Pointed questions, the kind that end with a polygraph test she would fail. But that night, she was just trying to make sense of what Michelle was asking. Michelle asked her friend to watch Jaden for the weekend and then take him to Michelle's parents on Tuesday. Not immediately, not that night. Tuesday, 2 days from now, after Michelle was supposed to be back in Louisiana. The friend was concerned about her traveling after having been up for such a long period of time. Michelle had just driven through the night from Louisiana, barely stopping, running on no sleep. Now she was saying she'd get back in the car and drive another 18 hours south, alone, starting at 9 o'clock at night. But before Michelle left, she gave her friend something, a letter. Michelle had written it herself. The friend read it there while Michelle waited. The words didn't quite make sense. Fragments of guilt, fear, responsibility for something Michelle wouldn't name. I don't know what's going on, but I know the fingers are all on me. I was responsible for everything. I'm hurting and scared. There were instructions for Jaden, how he should be cared for. But woven through it all was confession without details, apology without explanation. I'm sorry for getting them involved and getting them in the middle. What was Michelle afraid of or running from that she couldn't put into words, even in a letter to her closest friend? The letter read like someone preparing for the worst, or someone who had already done something she couldn't take back. Michelle had specifically instructed her friend not to tell her parents of her trip until she dropped Jaden off on Tuesday. Not Sunday night, not Monday. To Tuesday, when Michelle would already be in Louisiana, already back at school, already unreachable. Keep that instruction in mind. Michelle told her friend she had some pillows and blankets in the car and that she would stop along the way back. She'd rest. She'd be fine. She promised her friend that once on the road again, she would call to check in. Then Michelle got back in her car, alone this time, without Jaden, and drove off into the night. Heading south, heading back to Louisiana, or so she said. The call came later that night. Michelle, from the road, checking in as promised. The friend asked if she was okay. Michelle said she was fine. She'd call again. The conversation lasted only a few minutes. It was the last time anyone spoke to Michelle McMullen before she disappeared. By Monday afternoon, when the friend tried to reach Michelle again, the calls that followed went nowhere. Michelle called once, just like she promised. Sometime after leaving Harrisburg Sunday night, heading south on the dark highway, she pulled over or stopped for gas and dialed her friend. A short call, a tired woman on the road, checking in, letting someone know she was okay. Michelle didn't say much about where she was or how she was feeling, just that she was fine. She was driving. She'd make it back. The call lasted only a few minutes. The friend hung up, thinking nothing of it. An exhausted driver keeping her word, touching base before disappearing back into the long stretch of highway between Pennsylvania and Louisiana. It felt ordinary, routine, even. In that moment, no one knew this brief call was the last time anyone would speak to Michelle McMullen before she disappeared. No one knew to be afraid. No one knew that the voice on the other end of the line, tired, quiet, unremarkable, would become the final piece of evidence in a timeline that hadn't started yet. The last confirmed contact, the last data point before silence. The friend went to bed Sunday night thinking Michelle was somewhere in Virginia or North Carolina. The broughter's hands on the wheel, pushing through the night just like she'd done on the way up. By Tuesday, she'd be back in Louisiana. By Tuesday, Jaden would be with his grandparents. Everything would settle into place. But by Monday morning, when the friend tried Michelle's cell phone, there was no answer. She tried again. Still nothing. She tried again. That's how it happened.
Some of those back roads down there, I mean, you could be missing for a month before anybody would spot your car.
The friend tells police that Michelle had written a letter before she drove off, that Michelle had done it herself and handed it to her before getting back in the car. For days, the investigation had been chasing theories of abduction, accident, medical emergency. A woman who'd left everything behind, her purse, her phone, her wallet, because someone had taken her or because something had gone terribly wrong. But the letter changed the direction of every question. The letter was addressed to the friend. In addition to spelling out instructions on how Jaden should be cared for, it contained confusing statements. Admissions of guilt about something Michelle wouldn't name. Expressions of fear and hurt.
I don't know what's going on, but I know the fingers are all on me. I was responsible for everything. I'm hurting and scared.
I don't know what's going on, but I know the fingers are all on me. I was responsible for everything. I'm hurting and scared. I'm sorry for getting them involved and getting them in the middle. Michelle wrote like someone running from something. Like someone who'd done something she couldn't take back. Like someone who didn't want to be found. Keep that letter in mind. It will become the turning point in how law enforcement views Michelle McMullen not as a victim, but as someone with something to hide. Michelle's mother read the letter over and over. Not because she doubted what it said, but because she doubted it was even Michelle's hand that wrote it. I said, "This is not Michelle's handwriting." I had to keep reading it because, like I said, this is not my daughter's handwriting. She held the paper, studied every line, every loop, every word. She knew Michelle's handwriting the way a mother knows the sound of her child's footsteps in the hall. It's similar to her handwriting, but this is not her handwriting. It's not. There's something primal about knowing your child's handwriting, the slant of their letters, the pressure of their pen, the way a parent knows a cry in the dark belongs to their own child and not someone else's. But police had a different view. The friend had watched Michelle write the letter. She'd handed it over herself. There was no question about who had written it or when. After analysing the letter and speaking with the friend, police found no reason to conduct a handwriting analysis. They believed the letter was from Michelle.
I said, this is not Michelle's handwriting. I had to keep reading it because, like I said, this is not my daughter's handwriting. And similar.
Investigators found no reason to test the handwriting at all. Michelle's mother insisted. This wasn't her daughter's hand. Something was wrong. But the investigation moved forward without testing what she disputed. The letter was accepted as genuine, and with that acceptance came a shift in the entire theory of the case. Michelle McMullen was no longer only a victim in this story. She was someone who'd written about guilt and responsibility and fear. Someone who'd walked away from her locked car with nothing, toward a road where she could vanish. The letter shifts everything. The abduction theory, the one that let Michelle's parents hold on to the idea that their daughter needed them, was waiting to be found, starts to crack. If Michelle wrote that letter, if those are her words about guilt and responsibility, then maybe she didn't want to be found at all. Michael McMullen received a phone call from Detective Michael Thornton of the Susquehanna Township Police Department, who asked if he knew how to get a hold of Michelle, if the letter suggested Michelle was running from something. The phone call was about to answer what? Detective Michael Thornton had been investigating financial discrepancies at the church, where Michelle formerly worked as administrator. He was calling because he needed to speak with her about the investigation. He was very forward in that he said there had been an investigation with things at her former employment. Michelle had worked as an administrator at the church, handling financial functions, and now there was an investigation. Thornton was careful to clarify where things stood. He indicated at that time Michelle was not a suspect. He said they were not looking to arrest Michelle. Not a suspect, not looking to arrest her, just needed to speak with her. That was how Thornton framed it. But Michael had to tell him that Michelle was missing, had been missing for weeks, that they'd filed a missing persons report, searched hospitals, found her car abandoned in Maryland, and had no idea where she was. As the conversation continued, Michael explained what he understood about Michelle's employment at the church. As I understand, Michelle left her employment in the end of July and had given notice with the understanding that she was going to school to Louisiana. That was the story Michelle had told him. She'd left the church job at the end of July, given notice, moved to Louisiana to pursue her education. Everything had been voluntary, planned, on her terms. But Thornton's questions suggested something else had happened. something Michael hadn't been told. Michelle was fired from her job in July 2008 for poor performance. Not a resignation, not a voluntary departure to pursue school. Fired. For poor performance. In July, 2 months before she disappeared. There are small lies children tell their parents to avoid disappointment. And then there are the silences that reshape everything you thought you knew about who they are. Michael realized, mid-conversation, that his daughter had never told him she'd been fired at all. She'd let him believe she left the church job voluntarily to pursue her education. She'd packed up, moved to Louisiana with Jaden, enrolled at Grambling State, and never once mentioned that she hadn't left on her own terms. Now, a month after she vanished, that silence read entirely differently than it did when she was still answering her phone. The letter's words about guilt and responsibility took on new weight. I don't know what's going on, but I know the fingers are all on me. I was responsible for everything. Michelle was fired and didn't tell her father. She wrote a letter about guilt and responsibility, but wouldn't name what she'd done. The questions in that letter. I don't know what's going on, but I know the fingers are all on me. Suddenly sound less like confusion and more like someone who knows exactly what's coming. Detective Thornton explains what happened after Michelle left the church. In July, church officials did an audit of the funds and discovered numerous discrepancies. What Michelle knew was coming had arrived. After Michelle was fired for poor performance, the church conducted an audit of the financial accounts she had managed as administrator. They did an audit of the funds and discovered numerous discrepancies. Michelle was in charge of doing certain financial functions for the church, donations, expenses, records. When they examined the books after she left, they found money missing. Thornton's investigation began there, and it led to a number Michael would never forget. Our investigation found that there's over $19,000 worth of missing funds. Over $19,000. The number was specific, documented, undeniable. Michael heard the figure and understood immediately why Michelle wrote about fingers pointing at her, why she said she was responsible for everything, why she was hurting and scared and sorry for getting people involved. $19,000 missing from the church accounts she'd managed. 19,000 reasons to run. Before we reveal what those warrants actually charge Michelle with, are you still here? Comment A if you think Michelle is a victim who needs to be found. Or B if you think she orchestrated her own disappearance, and add one short reason why. A quick note, what follows includes some recreated details for narrative purposes, reflecting the emotional weight of the documented facts. Susquehanna Township had filed criminal warrants for embezzlement and stealing from the church. The charges, felony theft by forgery, unlawful taking, and deception of an amount over $2,000. An arrest warrant now existed in Michelle's name. She was no longer just a missing person, she was also a wanted fugitive. Michael had spent weeks believing his daughter was a victim, that she'd been taken from her car against her will, that she was lying injured somewhere, unable to call for help, waiting to be found. Now police were telling him she might be running from a felony warrant, that the letter about guilt wasn't confusion, it was confession, that the abandoned car wasn't evidence of abduction, it was the start of a planned escape. The case had fully split into two irreconcilable theories that couldn't both be true. A father can hold two truths at once, that his daughter might be lying injured somewhere, and that his daughter might be running from something she did, but he can't reconcile them. Michelle McMullen was now both missing and wanted. She could be a victim who needed to be found and helped. She could be a fugitive who orchestrated her own disappearance to evade arrest. The evidence supported both theories, and neither one offered Michael McMullen any comfort. When news of the arrest warrant becomes public, the shift in how people see Michelle's disappearance happens almost immediately. The warrant isn't just a legal document, it becomes public knowledge. Word spreads through Harrisburg that Michelle McMullen, the missing single mother everyone had been worried about, is wanted for embezzling over $19,000 from her church. Michael watches the narrative around his daughter's disappearance shift in real time. Once there's any release of some type of criminal information, everybody's mind is made up. The sympathy evaporates. The concern fades. The urgency to find a woman who might be injured or in danger, that starts to die too. People are now convinced that Michelle must have done something, that the embezzlement is what's wrong, that she's not missing but running. The theory that had kept volunteers searching, that had kept the community concerned, begins to collapse. Michelle is no longer a mother who needs help. She's a criminal who doesn't want to be found. Michael feels it in conversations that shift when he walks into a room. He sees it in the way people look at his family now. The questions change. The assumptions harden. Once a person becomes a suspect, it's almost impossible to get people to see them as a victim again, even when both things could be true at the same time. Michael fears what this does to the search, that people will stop looking for someone they think orchestrated her own disappearance, that law enforcement will shift resources from rescue to apprehension, that his daughter will be written off as a fugitive when she could be lying somewhere hurt, waiting for someone to find her. She could be out there laying in a ditch, dead. Somebody, injured, raped her, killed her. The warrant doesn't mean she's safe. It doesn't mean she's not a victim. It doesn't prove she walked away from that car on her own terms, or that she's alive somewhere, hiding, evading arrest. All it proves is that Susquehanna Township believes she committed a crime. And that belief, once it becomes public, reshapes everything. Once there's any release of criminal information, everybody's mind is made up. The Harrisburg Bureau of Police continues investigating Michelle as a missing person. They still treat
Our investigation found that there's over $19,000 worth of missing funds.
The questions he'd asked when she was just a missing person needed to change now that she was a fugitive. He started with Michelle's childhood friend, the woman who'd known her since elementary school. The first interview had been brief, almost perfunctory. This one would be different. "I need you to walk me through the last conversation you had with Michelle," Thornton said, watching her body language carefully. Every detail. The friend shifted in her seat. "I already told you. We talked about normal things, work, life, nothing unusual." "When exactly was this?" "A few days before she disappeared." Thornton leaned forward. "A few days. Can you be more specific?" The friend's eyes moved to the left. "Maybe Thursday or Wednesday?" "Which one?" "I don't remember exactly." Thornton made a note. The first interview. She'd said Tuesday with certainty. Now the day was shifting. "Did Michelle mention any plans to leave town?" "No." "Did she seem stressed about money?" A pause. "No more than usual?" "What does that mean?" "Everyone worries about money sometimes." Thornton watched her hands. They were clasped tightly together, knuckles white. When people lie, they often unconsciously try to hold themselves still, as if movement will give them away. The more questions you ask, the harder that becomes. He changed tactics. Did Michelle ever ask you to hold on to anything for her money, documents, a bag? The friend's jaw tightened. No. You're sure? Yes. Thornton set down his pen. I'd like you to take a polygraph test. The colour drained from her face. Why? To eliminate you as someone who might be helping Michelle hide. I'm not helping her hide. Then you won't mind taking the test. She looked at the door, then back at Thornton. Do I have to? No, but if you refuse, I have to ask myself why. She agreed. The polygraph examiner was a veteran from the Pennsylvania State Police. He explained the process calmly. Baseline questions first, then the relevant ones. The friend sat rigid in the chair, sensors attached to her fingers, chest, and arm. Is your name Sarah? The examiner asked. Yes. The machine tracked her response. Do you live in Pennsylvania? Yes. Have you spoken to Michelle McMullen since November 11th, 2008? A pause. No. The examiner's face remained neutral. Do you know where Michelle McMullen is right now? Another pause. No. Did Michelle tell you she was planning to run? No. After 15 minutes, the examiner removed the sensors and asked her to wait outside. He reviewed the charts, then called Thornton in. She's being deceptive, he said, pointing to the spikes on the readout. Specifically on whether she's had contact with Michelle since the disappearance, and whether Michelle told her she was planning to run. Thornton stared at the chart. Michelle's closest friend knew something, and she'd just lied about it under oath. The friend knew something, but a failed polygraph isn't evidence of a crime. Thornton couldn't charge her. What he could do was make sure that when Michelle was found, every officer in the country would know exactly who they were dealing with. On November 25th, 2008, Michelle McMullen's name was entered into the National Crime Information Center database a second time. The first entry had been filed by the Harrisburg Bureau of Police. Missing person, female, 27, last seen November 11th. The kind of entry that tells officers to look for someone who might need help. This entry was different. We entered her as a wanted person, Thornton explained later. The distinction mattered. A missing person is someone to be found and returned safely. A wanted person is someone with an active arrest warrant. When Michelle's name appeared in the system now, any law enforcement agency that encountered her would see both flags. If she is found, the agency needs to know that there are charges pending in another jurisdiction, Thornton said. The warrant had been issued 5 days earlier. Theft by unlawful taking. $19,000. If an officer in another state ran her name during a traffic stop, or if a hotel clerk called in a suspicious guest, the system would tell them immediately this woman is wanted in Pennsylvania. But the second entry wasn't just about making an arrest. That was done for several reasons, Thornton said. There's some meaning as to why she may be missing and to make sure she's returned safely. There's a strange bureaucratic poetry in being both missing and wanted. It means you're simultaneously someone people are searching for to save and someone they're searching for to arrest. The first classification says you might be in danger. The second says you might be dangerous. Thornton needed Michelle found alive. She couldn't answer for the stolen money if she was dead. She couldn't explain the letter, the blank checks, the friend who failed a polygraph. The criminal case required a defendant who could stand trial. The missing person case required finding her breathing. The warrant gave officers a reason to hold her if they found her. The missing person flag gave them a reason to look. Together, The two entries meant that Michelle McMullen was now one of the most documented unfound people in Pennsylvania. 2 police departments, 2 investigations, 2 entries in the national database. Harrisburg Bureau of Police still treated her as a missing person who might be in danger. Susquehanna Township Police treated her as a fugitive. Same woman, different lenses. We still had a missing person that we didn't know where she was, Thornton said. The database could track her classification, it could flag her for arrest, it could broadcast her name to every officer in the country. What it couldn't do was tell them where to look. There was still a missing person nobody could find. By the time her name went into the system a second time, Michelle had been missing for nearly 3 months. Both departments were looking, neither was finding. Nearly 3 months passed with no credible sightings. Then, on Monday, December 15th, a man walked into the 9th Inn in Martinsburg, West Virginia, to check out. The woman behind the front desk smiled as she processed his receipt. Blonde hair, professional demeanor, name tag that read Monique Watson. He glanced at her face, then glanced again. Something about her looked familiar. He'd seen the missing person bulletins circulating for weeks. A 27-year-old woman from Harrisburg who'd vanished after her car was found abandoned. The photo showed brown hair, but the face, the eyes. He pulled out his phone and navigated to the bulletin. Michelle McMullen. He looked at the photo, then back at the woman across the counter. Martinsburg was 30 miles from where her car had been found on Interstate 81. Their eyes met across the counter. And in that instant, both of them know. Her smile faltered. His hand tightened on the phone. Neither spoke. Michelle looked down at the receipt. The transaction was complete. All she had to do was hand it to him and he'd leave. But he wasn't leaving. He was staring. And she could see it in his face recognition, settling into certainty. She set the receipt on the counter. "Have a safe trip," she said quietly. He didn't pick it up. "Are you—" She doesn't run. She doesn't grab her purse. She simply sets down the pen she'd been holding, turns, and walks through the employee door as if stepping out for a break. The door closes behind her with a soft click. The guest stood frozen for 3 seconds. Then he called 911. The responding officers arrived within minutes. The front desk was empty. The chair behind the counter was still warm. The hotel manager appeared from the back office, confused. "Yes," he confirmed. "A woman named Monique Watson had been working the front desk, hired a few weeks earlier. Blonde hair, late 20s, about 5'7". Excellent employee. Kept to herself. Did she give you a contact number? An address?" The manager pulled her employment file. The phone number was disconnected. The address was a vacant lot. No emergency contact listed. "When did she leave?" "Just now, a few minutes before you arrived. She went through the back and didn't come back." The officers searched the area. No sign of her. Michelle McMullen had been missing for 93 days. 2 police departments searching. Her name in the national database, twice missing and wanted. Her face on bulletins across Pennsylvania and West Virginia. And for at least part of those 93 days, she'd been working the front desk of a highway hotel 30 miles from where her abandoned car was found, checking in guests under a name that wasn't hers. For the first time since November 11th, someone had seen Michelle McMullen alive. But by the time police arrived, she was gone again. And the question that would divide investigators and her family was this: Was the woman behind that desk really Michelle, or someone who just looked like her? The question divided the investigation, but for Thornton, the answer would come from the evidence.
And then he saw her, and then she took off running.
By the time officers arrived, she was gone. 2 witnesses, Thornton had continued, both certain it was Michelle. Michael had asked about DNA, about fingerprints, anything forensic. No physical evidence, Thornton had admitted. She fled before we could make contact, but the identification is solid. Hotel records, fake documents, witness statements. We're confident it was her. Confident, not certain. Michael found Michelle's mother in the kitchen and told her what the detective had said. She listened without speaking, her face going pale. "They say it was her," he said quietly. "They're sure." Her hands were shaking. But they didn't test anything. No DNA, no fingerprints. How can they be sure? Witnesses, 2 of them, both said the same thing. Witnesses can be wrong. I know. They sat together in the kind of silence that follows impossible news. Their daughter had been alive, hiding under a false name, building fake documents, working a normal job at a highway hotel, and the moment someone recognized her, she'd walked away and disappeared again. Found and lost in the same sentence. Michelle's mother spoke first. If it was really her, why didn't she call us? Why didn't she tell us she was okay? Michael had no answer. The detective had said Michelle was wanted on theft charges, that the warrant was still active. But warrants didn't explain why a daughter wouldn't contact her parents for 3 months, why she'd choose to hide instead of coming home, unless she couldn't come home. Unless the person they'd raised wasn't the person who'd written that letter and disappeared. We can't accept that she was right there and we lost her again without even knowing for sure it was her voice breaking. Michael called Thornton back that evening. If it was really her. I need to know for certain, he said, not witness statements, DNA. Thornton's response was measured. I understand. But we don't have a DNA sample to compare. She's gone again. Until she's physically located, we can't run that test. Then I can't accept the identification. Mr. McMullen, I know this is hard. You're telling me my daughter was alive and ran the moment she was found. And you're asking me to believe that without proof. I can't do that. I need to know. The call ended with nothing resolved. Law enforcement called it a confirmed sighting. The family called it unproven. And somewhere between those 2 certainties, a woman who might be Michelle McMullen remained in the wind, using a name that isn't hers, running from a warrant she may never answer for. That disagreement never resolved. Years passed. The case remained open. How does a case end when the person at its center never comes home, never stands trial, and never confirms whether the woman behind that hotel desk was really her? The Michelle McMullen case file exists in 2 places in the National Crime Information Center database. One entry lists her as a missing person, last seen November 11th, 2008. The other lists her as a wanted fugitive with an active arrest warrant for theft by unlawful taking. 2 classifications. Same woman. No resolution to either. No arrest has been made, no trial scheduled, no DNA confirmation of the Martinsburg sighting. The hotel identification remains what it was. 2 witness statements, forged documents, and a woman who fled before police arrived. Detective Michael Thornton moved on to other cases. The file stayed open on his desk for months, then moved to archives. He still believes the woman at the hotel was Michelle. He's never seen evidence that changed his mind. Michael McMullen still refuses to accept it without forensic.
I don't believe that that individual is my daughter simply because we have not got a 100% ID from the authorities.
And somewhere between those two certainties, Michelle McMullen remains unfound. Jaden McMullen started kindergarten in the fall after his mother disappeared. Then first grade, then middle school, each year without her. He knows the story now, the full account. The embezzlement, the letter, the hotel sighting his grandfather refuses to believe, the warrant that's still active. He doesn't remember her voice anymore. The details fade when you're that young. Some cases close with handcuffs. Some close with closure. This one remains suspended between the two. Michael doesn't want a verdict. He wants an answer. Not from a courtroom or a detective's report, but from Michelle herself. Why she took the money. Where she went. Whether the woman working under the name Monique Watson was really her, or just someone who looked enough like her to fool two witnesses. He waits for a phone call that may never come, for a letter that never arrives, for the knock on the door that would mean she finally came home. The warrant remains active. If Michelle McMullen is found stocked for a traffic violation, applying for a job under her real name, recognized at another hotel desk, the system will flag her immediately. She'll be arrested and extradited to Pennsylvania to face the theft charges. But the law doesn't answer the questions that matter to a father raising his grandson alone. It doesn't explain why a daughter would disappear without calling home. It doesn't close the gap between the woman who left that letter on November 11th, 2008, and the person she became after. Michelle McMullen is officially both missing and wanted, a woman caught between two categories in a system that prefers certainty. She tried to disappear by becoming someone else, building a new identity with false documents and an assumed name, but a face that she couldn't change. Somewhere, a son is growing up without his mother, and a father is still waiting for the phone to ring. And that's where the story stands today, unresolved, unanswered, suspended between missing and wanted. Jaden McMullen has lived more years without his mother than he lived with her. He doesn't remember her voice anymore. Michael McMullen still waits for a phone call that may never come. This isn't a story about closure. It's about the questions that remain when someone vanishes into a new identity and never looks back. Some cases close with handcuffs. Some close with funerals. This one remains open, a reminder that running from consequences doesn't erase them. It only multiplies the people left waiting for answers that may never come. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment below. What stays with you most from Michelle's case? Your thoughts matter, and I read every single one. If you know someone who would find this case as compelling as you did, please share it with them. Thank you for listening to this story with me. This case is based on real events drawn from public records, law enforcement reports, and media coverage. Some scenes have been dramatized for storytelling, but the core facts remain true to the documented case. Out of respect for the real people involved, especially Jaden and the McMullen family, this retelling focuses on honoring the truth of what happened and what was lost.